Hey guys, in this tutorial we're going to take a look at recreating this really cool Treehouse restaurant. It's a really cool architectural precedent from New Zealand, home country. What up? Alright, so here's what we're going to be making in Grasshopper. Alright, so let's make a new definition. I've just created this curve that we're going to use later on. You might want to create something similar. It's just a weird wobbly curve, not doing anything in particular. Anyway, we'll start with a graph mapper. I'm going to set it to Bezier like I usually do, and we're going to plug in a range, and then we're going to plug in a multiplier on the other side, and I'm going to multiply it by, let's see, I'll set my slider to a maximum of maybe 200. And then I'm going to copy and paste these, plug that range into there as well, and we're going to construct a point. So I'm going to plug my, this is going, okay, so the range giving me a whole lot of points at irregular intervals is going to be my z value, my height, and then coming out of the graph mapper is going to be my y value. And so I'm just going to mess around with this a little bit, and there we go. So that's the bottom of our treehouse sort of shape, and I also want to create a top half. So I could just flip this curve and mirror it, but we're going to do it. Using a more sort of algorithmic method. So what we're going to do is we're going to reverse the list coming out of here, and then we're going to throw it into a number parameter, and so we'll plug this one and then this in, and then we're going to throw that into our multiplication again, and then we need to do the exact same thing for our range. So I'm going to plug this in. Okay, this might not work straight away, and you'll see. I'll explain why in a sec. So what this is basically going to do is it's going to repeat the values going up and then going back down. We want to repeat the points coming out of the graph mapper, but we need to modify the ones coming out of the range ever so slightly, and we're going to do that with a negative. And so we're going to plug the negative into the list, and I'm just going to flip those around the opposite way, so we go list reverse first and then range second. There we go. So that's our basic shape. What I might do at this stage actually is I might just to build in a little bit more functionality into it, I'm gonna make this a cylindrical point, and we get that from our vector tab point cylindrical. Okay, so there's a couple of these two sort of have parallels in the way they're created. So our radius value is going to be this y value that we created. Our elevation is the z value that we created, and then we just need to plug in an angle value, and so this is different to the x. So our angle value is going to come from another range component. I forgot to add a number of steps to my slider. Set it to a max of 30, give it a value of whatever, 11 for now, doesn't really matter. And now I'm going to plug in an expression, which is going to be 2 times pi times x. This is going to be my rotation value. And then, same thing I did here, copy and paste all 3 of these. To copy and paste, I'm just dragging it, tapping Alt, and then letting go. And there we go. Alright, so we need to plug in the negative value, we need to disconnect the range and then connect the new range, and then we'll plug that into our angle, and we should be getting a nice rotated or cylindrical set of points. Now we're going to interpolate through that, and you notice, okay, it's not throwing a curve back, and that is because when we reverse this list, what it does is it doubles up the middle point. So what we need to do is we need to get rid of that point right bang in the center, and let's just check what point that is in fact. If we pop this open, well, let's just drag it out a little bit more. It should be right in the middle of the list. There we go. Item 11 and item 12. And so what we can do, instead of creating a script that will find the middle of the list and then either taking the 11th or the 12th item, luckily our number of steps will line up exactly with this. Well, not luckily, mathematically it makes sense. The 11th item index 11 is going to be the very last item, and so we're just going to use a cull index on here, and we're going to plug that into here, and then we're going to connect that back into our vertices for an interpolate curve, and there we get it, our interpolate curve. So at the moment this is lying a little bit, because what we're doing is we're saying 0.25 of a full rotation, so it does 0.25 of a full rotation, and then it does another 0.25 because we reversed that list. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to divide this all by 2, just so that our slide is giving a bit more of an accurate reading. So if I increase this to 1, that would be 1 full rotation. Alright, cool. So now I am going to, you know what, I'm not too fussed about this at the moment, move it right down. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to revolve this surface. Okay, so a revolved surface asks for 3 things: a profile curve, a revolution axis, and an angle domain. The angle domain we don't need to worry about because that's just 0 to 2 pi. Our axis is a line. And for this I'm going to use a line SDL because this is the most convenient way to do it. We're going to plug in our axis, and we're just going to set our direction for our line, start direction and length, to a z vector. And I also need to plug in a point for it to start at, and that's just going to be a simple XYZ point, and there we go. Looks a bit funky at the moment, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the position of this axis using a number slider. I'll set that to maybe a maximum of 20, and in here you could just throw, like, you could set your minimum to -20 or and your maximum to 0, but I prefer to just throw down a negative component. It doesn't matter which way you do it, this is just my personal preference. And so we want to be going negative in the X direction. And as soon as we do this, we get a nice sort of opening in our, sort of where our tree would go, essentially. Alright, so now I'm just going to increase this, and you know what, I'm really not liking the shape of that. Let me tweak that a bit. So give it a bit more curvature through the center, maybe move that inflection point a bit further up. You know what, I'm liking that a lot better. Now the treehouse doesn't exactly do this. You'll see that it kind of wraps around and then it opens out. It doesn't actually meet back at the edge, and so you know what, I guess I'll show you how to do that as well. We could do a rotate axis, And so we're going to rotate this curve around this axis that we created, and we're going to create a range like we did. We're going to copy this over here, and I'm going to change it back to 2 times pi times x. Set that to 1. Then I'll plug that into my I'll plug that into my angle. And we also need to scale these as we go around. And so we're going to do a scale non-uniform, and we're going to scale these pieces of geometry based on, let's see, set that to a maximum value of 2, and the base plane is going to be this point over here, and then we're going to go x and y, but not z. And actually, hold on, that's not quite right, because what I actually need is, I need a range component, because what we want is the scale to slowly increase or decrease, depending on which way you want to do it. And so I'm going to make a construct domain, and we're going to plug in 2 values, an upper and a lower. And so I'll set the start to 1 and the end to 1.71, and then I'm going to also grab another slider for my number of steps, set this to a maximum of 20. This does not need to correspond to the original range that we created. This is a separate one. So we'll plug that into our slider, and this can go into our x and y values now. So there we go. Now we're not going to revolve this anymore. We are going to loft through it. And there we go. You'll see it does kind of look a bit more blocky in the preview, but as soon as we bake it out, we can see we're getting exactly what we want. And so now I'm just going to increase this end a bit, something like that. You know what? It's sort of puffing out a bit too much for me. Let me decrease this a bit. Yeah, that's a bit better for me. Alright, cool. So now we're going to get on to, okay, we've created the base geometry. We're going to move on to the next part, which is the fins. So for that, we're going to use a divide surface. And we need to plug in 2 sliders for our U and V divisions. And so I'll give those a maximum of 20. And I'm just going to set them to 2 different numbers for now. It doesn't matter what they are just yet. Okay, and now we're going to turn off all this geometry just so it's not getting in the way. Okay, now we're going to check what direction these are going in with an interpolate curve. What I mean by check the direction is check which way our tree structure works, because as soon as we plug in this interpolate curve, it's going to, as you can see, it's going to make a line through those 8 points in each of those lists. And cool, it's going vertical in the direction we want, which is excellent. If we did want it to go the other way, we could use the flip matrix component, plug that in, and there you go, you'd have your horizontal lines, but I want the vertical lines. Alright, and so at this stage, I'm also going to do one other thing as a slight tangent. I don't want to disable those. I'm going to make a plane surface. I'm going to also make that in my XZ plane. And I'm going to set some X and Y values. They ask for domains. So I'm going to make a domain, going to set my slider to 100, and I'm going to throw down a negative as well. And so that goes into my A, and that goes into my B. X and Y. And there's my plane surface. Now I'm going to duplicate this divide. Cool, it's all working. And we're just going to check that our divisions are going in the same direction. Yep, they are, so we're good to keep going. Alright. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move all of these points based on their normal vector. So I'm going to grab an amplitude component. And let's see, what do I need? I need a slider. This is going to be my amplitude. I'll set it to maybe 10. Not 10 is nowhere near enough. I'll set it to 50. And yeah, somewhere around there is good. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to use this curve. Just going to move it over here somewhere. And I'm going to take a curve closest point component. And I'm going to find the closest point between each of these original points. And I need to reference this curve in. So I'm going to set one curve, bring it in, and there we go. Now I'm going to take the distance between these, and I'm going to use a remap. And every time we use the remap, we should, well, you don't have to, but you should use the bounds component because it makes it so much easier. I'm going to flatten that, plug that into my source domain. And so what this is going to do, or what I want this to do, is I want to rotate these points based on how far away they are from this curve. And so we're going to change our target domain to, let's see, I've got it over here somewhere, just this multiplier of 2 pi x. And so now what we want to do is, okay, we've only created this plane surface as a sort of a mirror of what's going to go on our actual surface. So I'm not actually going to use this over here. I'm going to connect it into what's coming out of here. So my points are my thing I'm moving, and my normal vector is my vector amplitude. And what we also need is, okay, now we've got a rotation value from here, but we need a rotation axis. And so the way we're going to do that is we're going to evaluate the surface. Which is over here, and we're going to evaluate it at our UV coordinate, and we should get a series of planes. But they're not quite facing the same direction, or the direction I want, so I'm going to deconstruct these planes. Oops. Key thing to note here, with your evaluate surface component, P is the point output, N is the normal, and F is the frame. The frame is also another name for your plane. Okay, so let me turn this off so it's not getting in the way. I'll also turn my points off. They're over here. Okay, so now we're going to construct a new plane. And let's see, we want the origin, the z value of the original plane is probably going to be our y, and then the x is going to remain the x. Did I get that right? I think so. Cool, so I want to be rotating around this axis of the curve. And so we are going to now rotate, and we've got a plane now. We also need the geometry we're rotating, which are these points that we moved, and we also need the angle. So now let's see what happens when we interpolate these points. Alright, we're getting something. So what we're going to do is we are going to loft these two curves together that we created. The base one over here, and the target one. Now it is doing something a bit funky just because we've got this set to do a full rotation. I'm going to hone that back to 0.25, a quarter of a rotation. I'm also going to increase the amount of divisions along that axis to something like that. And I'm going to turn off my plane surface because it's only getting in the way now. Alright. What I might also want to do is I might want to scale this move down so that as the closer it gets to the top, the less these fins sort of protrude out. So the way I'm going to do that is, let's see, this is going to be my V divisions if I'm correct. Yep. So we're going to create a range. That range is going to be, I think it's going to be x over 2. And so that's going to give me 5 points. Just to make this easier, I'm going to set this to even numbers, and I'm going to, yes, so if this is 6, it's giving me 8 points, so I'm going to do x over 2 minus 1. Cool. And then we're going to reverse that list, not the vector, and we're going to combine that into one number parameter, and we're going to multiply these together. That and that, and there we go. So that tapers all the way down to pretty much 0 thickness, so I don't quite like that. So I'm going to construct another domain, and I'll leave the bottom value at 1. Oh, sorry, the end value at 1. My start, though, is what I want to change. Alright, so there we go. That's working. Our opening could probably be a bit larger, so I'm going to go back to, let's see, I think it was this slider here, which is my scale. And there we go, we're almost done. The last thing I want to do is I just want to add in like a floor plate. So I'm going to do that by taking a section through this lofted surface that I created. So I'm going to go to my intersect tab, and I'm going to find my Brep plane intersection. Now my plane, okay, this is going to be my brep. My plane is going to come from an evaluate box. So I'm going to firstly create a bounding box around the surface. I'm going to plug that into my box for evaluation, and then I'm just going to plug a number into my W parameter, and that's going to be my plane. Now we just need to close this curve, and so we can grab the endpoints of that curve, plug it in, and then make a line 2 point between these, and we'll join those curves up. So we're going to join the section curve and this curve, and then we'll make a planar surface. And we can do that just using the surface parameter from our params tab. So there we go. And you know what, we could be a bit more adventurous with this. We could plug in maybe 3 sliders here, so that we've got 3 floor plates wherever we want. And there we go. That's our that's the basics of it. Now what's really good about this definition is we could quite simply just get a geometry component, and we could take everything out of this loft, and anything we plugged into here, if we would just plug in a sphere, it would do the exact same thing on that sphere as we want. And so anything I want, I can just plug into this geometry tab, and it'll give me my result. And so there you go. There is our treehouse with a lot of control. We've got control of the shape of the treehouse. We have control of any sort of twisting of the fins around this treehouse. Geez, we've got a lot here. We've got the thickness of our trunk. Geez, I don't even know what this one is. Oh, you know, there we go. If we only want part of our treehouse, we can sort of quadrant that off. This one's going to be our scale, or our stepping scale as it goes around here. This one is just for the revolved surface, so not the revolved surface, the loft, so we don't need to worry about that. What is this one doing? Oh, that's sort of the, I guess, the size of our plane, which dictates how much of this curve we're accessing when we're looking for a closest point. This is how much tapering we're having of those fins as they go up to the top. We've also got a count of the amount of fins we want around this piece of geometry, so literally any number you could ever want. We've got control of our floor plates. We've got control of how much these floor plates are actually sort of twisting around their own axis. You can see it's really subtle, but if we go all the way up to 1, you know, that's probably a bit too much. I quite like it at 0.25 because that's a quarter of a full rotation, so it won't go past 90 degrees. And what does this final slider do? Oh, that's just our overall amplitude of these fins. Cool. So, hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial. I think we covered a lot of content in that one. See you next time.